The governess who became a countess. A story of revenge, redemption, and unexpected love. Part 1, The Humiliation. The borrowed dress. Isabella Munro stood at the edge of the grand ballroom, trying to make herself invisible. It wasn't difficult. In a room full of silk gowns that shimmered like precious gems, her borrowed dress looked exactly like what it was, a cast-off from her employer's wardrobe, altered hastily to fit her smaller frame. The pale green fabric hung awkwardly at her shoulders, and the hemline dragged slightly, threatening to trip her with every step. She shouldn't have come. Governesses didn't belong at balls, even when their employers insisted they attend to help watch the children. Lady Pemberton had been kind enough, pressing the dress into Isabella's hands that morning with an encouraging smile. "You're young, my dear. You should enjoy an evening of music and dancing, even if you must stay near the children." But Isabella knew the truth. She was here to work, not to dream. At 22 years old, she'd learned to accept her place in the world. The daughter of a country vicar who'd died leaving nothing but debts, she'd been fortunate to secure a position with the Pemberton family. She had a roof over her head, food to eat, and 3 lovely children to teach. It was more than many in her situation could hope for. Still, as she watched the dancers swirl across the polished floor, their laughter rising like music, something in her chest ached. Once, long ago, she'd imagined a different life. A life where she might wear beautiful gowns and dance until dawn, where some kind gentleman might look at her with affection rather than the polite dismissal she'd grown accustomed to. "Miss Munro." 8-year-old Charlotte Pemberton tugged at her hand. "May I have some lemonade? Please?" Isabella smiled, grateful for the distraction from her melancholy thoughts. "Of course, dear. Let's find the refreshment table." She was navigating through the crowd, Charlotte's small hand in hers, when disaster struck. The collision. Isabella didn't see him until it was too late. One moment she was carefully making her way between clusters of guests, the next she'd collided with something solid and unyielding. The glass of lemonade she'd just collected flew from her hand, its contents splashing in a golden arc across an immaculate white coat. Time seemed to slow. Isabella watched in horror as the liquid spread across expensive fabric, staining it beyond any quick repair. Her eyes traveled upward, past the ruined coat to a strong jaw, aristocratic nose, and finally to the coldest pair of grey eyes she'd ever seen. Lord Adrian Blackwood, Earl of Thornfield, looked down at her with an expression of such profound disgust that Isabella actually took a step backward. "I'm so terribly sorry," she stammered, pulling out her handkerchief with shaking hands. "Please, let me. Don't touch me." His voice was ice, cutting through the sudden silence that had fallen around them. People were staring now, curious to see how the powerful Earl would handle this clumsy girl. Isabella's hand froze mid-reach. "My lord, I truly apologize. It was an accident. If you'll allow me to." "An accident?" Adrian's lip curled with contempt. "Tell me, does your employer not teach you to watch where you're walking? Or are servants so accustomed to clumsiness that they simply accept it as their nature?" Heat flooded Isabella's cheeks. Around them, she heard the whispers beginning, saw the judgmental stares. Charlotte pressed closer to her side, frightened by the Earl's harsh tone. "I'm not a servant, my lord. I'm a governess." Adrian laughed, but there was no humor in it. "A governess? How delightfully presumptuous, to claim you're somehow above your station." His cold eyes swept over her borrowed dress, and Isabella felt each second of that examination like a physical blow. "Though I suppose the ill-fitting gown should have told me everything I needed to know. You clearly don't belong here." Tears burned behind Isabella's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Not here. Not in front of all these people who already looked down on her. I apologize for the damage to your coat, Lord Blackwood. If you'll send me the bill for cleaning or replacement, I'll find a way to pay for it." "Pay for it?" Adrian's expression turned even colder, if that were possible. "This coat cost more than you'll earn in 3 years. No, I think we both know you'll never be able to compensate me for this incident." He turned to address the crowd that had gathered. Let this be a lesson. The lower classes should know their place. They should certainly not be allowed to wander freely among their betters at social functions. The humiliation was complete. Isabella felt it settle over her like a heavy cloak, suffocating and inescapable. She opened her mouth to respond, to defend herself, but what could she say? He was right about the coat, she could never afford to replace it. He was right about her place in society. She was nobody, nothing, just a governess in a borrowed dress who'd made a foolish mistake. Isabella. The voice was gentle, concerned. Isabella turned to see Thomas Blackwood pushing through the crowd. He was younger than his brother by several years, with the same aristocratic features but warmer eyes, brown instead of gray, currently filled with worry as they found her face. Thomas, stay back, Adrian commanded. This doesn't concern you. But Thomas ignored him, moving to stand beside Isabella. His hand found hers, and the gesture did not go unnoticed by the crowd. Fresh whispers erupted, sharper now, more scandalous. Are you all right? Thomas asked softly. Isabella nodded, not trusting her voice. For months, Thomas had been visiting the Pemberton household, ostensibly to discuss business with Lord Pemberton but always finding excuses to speak with her. They'd walked in the garden, discussed books and philosophy, and slowly, carefully, Isabella had allowed herself to hope that his attentions meant something. Looking at his concerned face now, seeing the way he held her hand despite his brother's fury and the crowd's judgment, she felt that hope bloom into something more dangerous. Something like love. The proposal that changed everything. Thomas, I said, step away from her. Adrian's voice had gone deadly quiet. No. Thomas turned to face his brother, still holding Isabella's hand. You've humiliated her enough, Adrian. This was an accident. There was no need to. No need? Adrian's face flushed with anger. She destroyed my coat and you defend her? Have you lost your senses? Perhaps I have. Thomas took a deep breath, and Isabella felt his hand tighten around hers. Or perhaps I've finally found them. Adrian, everyone, I'd like you to know that I've been courting Miss Isabella Munro for the past 3 months. And tonight, I intended to ask her to marry me. The ballroom erupted. Isabella felt the words hit her like a physical force, shock and joy and terror all mixing together until she couldn't tell one emotion from another. Thomas wanted to marry her? Despite everything, her lack of fortune, her position as a governess, her borrowed dress and uncertain future? She looked at his face and saw the truth there. He meant it. He actually meant it. But before she could respond, before she could process this impossible development, Adrian moved. He grabbed Thomas's arm, his grip tight enough that his brother winced. You will do no such thing, Adrian hissed. Have you forgotten who you are? What you owe to this family? You would throw away your inheritance, your good name, your future, for a governess? For Isabella, yes. Thomas met his brother's glare without flinching. I love her, Adrian. Can you understand that? Do you even know what love is, or has your heart frozen solid in your chest? For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in Adrian's cold eyes. Pain, perhaps, or recognition of some old wound. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by rage. If you propose to this woman, Adrian said clearly, loudly enough for everyone to hear, you will be cut off completely. No inheritance. No allowance. No family connections. You'll have nothing but whatever pathetic living you can scrape together on your own. Is that what you want? Is she worth that? Isabella found her voice at last. Thomas, no. You can't. I won't let you sacrifice everything for love? Thomas turned to her, his expression gentle despite the storm raging around them. Isabella, I've watched my brother become exactly what our father wanted, cold, calculating, caring only for wealth and position. I won't become that. I'd rather be poor and happy with you than rich and miserable without you. He dropped to one knee right there in the middle of the ballroom, still holding her hand, apparently unconcerned that half of London society was watching. "Isabella Munro, will you marry me?" The answer should have been simple. Yes. 1,000 times yes. Thomas was kind and intelligent and genuinely cared for her. With him, she could escape the precarious life of a governess, could have a home and family of her own, could finally be someone rather than nobody. But Isabella looked at Adrian's face, saw the absolute conviction there that he would destroy his brother's life if Thomas went through with this. She thought of Thomas's dreams. He wanted to study medicine, to travel, to make a difference in the world. All of that required resources he wouldn't have if Adrian followed through on his threat. And she thought of herself, of the love she'd started to feel for Thomas, and knew that love couldn't be built on the ruins of his relationship with his family, his future, his dreams. "I can't," she whispered, her heart breaking with every word. "Thomas, I care for you deeply, but I can't let you destroy your life for me. Your brother is right. We're from different worlds. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She pulled her hand from his, turned, and ran. Behind her, she heard Thomas calling her name, heard the crowd's excited chatter, heard Adrian's cold voice saying something she couldn't make out. Charlotte was crying, Lady Pemberton was calling for her, but Isabella kept running, out of the ballroom, through the marble halls, out into the cold night air. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs trembled, until she found herself in a dark garden far from the lights and music and judgment. Only then did she let herself collapse onto a stone bench and sob. The aftermath. The next morning, Lady Pemberton summoned Isabella to her sitting room. The older woman's kind face was troubled as she gestured for Isabella to sit. "My dear, I'm afraid I have unpleasant news. Lord Blackwood, the Earl, not his brother, has made it clear that your presence has become complicated. He suggested, rather strongly, that it would be best if you sought employment elsewhere." Isabella had expected this, but it still hurt. "I understand, my lady. I'll leave immediately." "No, no, take your time. A week, at least, to find a new position." "And Isabella." Lady Pemberton reached across and squeezed her hand. "What happened last night was not your fault. Lord Blackwood is known for his cruel nature. Some say his father beat the kindness out of him as a boy. It doesn't excuse his behavior, but perhaps it explains it." "And Thomas?" Isabella couldn't help but ask. Lady Pemberton's expression grew even sadder. "I'm told he left London this morning, bound for the family's country estate. His brother apparently confined him there, says he needs time to come to his senses away from unsuitable influences." "Unsuitable influences?" "Meaning her." Isabella nodded, feeling numb. "I see. Thank you for your kindness, Lady Pemberton. I'll begin looking for new employment immediately." But finding a new position proved impossible. Word had spread quickly through London society about the incident at the ball, embellished with each retelling until Isabella barely recognized herself in the stories. She was reckless, clumsy, had deliberately thrown lemonade on the Earl to get his attention. Some versions even suggested she'd been Thomas's mistress, trying to trap him into marriage. No respectable family would hire a governess with such scandal attached to her name. After a week of rejections, Isabella found herself packing her few belongings into a small trunk, facing an uncertain future with only a handful of coins and no prospects. She took a room in a cheap boarding house in a questionable neighborhood, the best she could afford. For 6 months, she lived in that dim, cramped room, taking whatever work she could find, mending clothes, giving reading lessons to shopkeepers' children, copying documents for a lawyer who asked no questions about her past. It was a gray, hopeless existence. Every day, Isabella felt herself shrinking, becoming smaller and quieter, as if she might eventually disappear entirely. Perhaps that would be for the best. Nobody wanted her. Nobody needed her. She was, as Adrian had so clearly stated, nobody. The letter that changed everything. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in early spring. Isabella almost didn't open it. She received so few letters that an official-looking envelope with a solicitor's return address seemed likely to be a mistake or, worse, some kind of bill she couldn't pay. But curiosity won out. She broke the seal and unfolded the crisp paper, her eyes scanning the formal legal language with growing confusion. Dear Miss Monroe, it is our duty to inform you of the recent passing of Lady Catherine Hartley, Countess of Rosewood. In her will, Lady Hartley has named you as her sole heir. Isabella read the sentence 3 times, certain she was misunderstanding. Lady Catherine Hartley? The name was vaguely familiar. Her mother had mentioned a distant cousin who'd married well, but Isabella had never met the woman. Why would she leave anything to Isabella, much less name her as sole heir? She read on, her hands beginning to shake. Lady Hartley's estate includes Rosewood Manor and its grounds, investments valued at approximately £50,000, and various properties in London and Bath. Additionally, as Lady Hartley died without direct heirs, her title of Countess of Rosewood passes to you as her nearest living relative. The letter fell from Isabella's nerveless fingers. £50,000. A manor. Properties. A title. She was a countess. Isabella laughed, a slightly hysterical sound in the quiet room. 6 months ago, Adrian Blackwood had called her common, unworthy, someone who didn't belong among her betters. Now, by a twist of fate she could never have imagined, she outranked him. A countess stood higher in society than an earl. She picked up the letter again, reading it more carefully. There were instructions to contact the solicitor, documents to sign, arrangements to be made. Lady Hartley had apparently been elderly and without close family, had researched her family tree and found Isabella, had left her everything out of some sense of family duty or perhaps loneliness. The reason didn't matter. What mattered was that everything had changed. Isabella was no longer nobody. She was Countess Isabella Hartley, with wealth and position and power. And as she sat in her tiny boarding house room, still dressed in her mended gown and worn shoes, Isabella felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Not hope this time. Something sharper, darker, more dangerous. Revenge. Adrian Blackwood had humiliated her, destroyed her reputation, ruined her life, and sent the man she loved into exile. He'd done it without a second thought, certain that someone like Isabella could never touch someone like him. He'd been wrong. Isabella stood, smoothing down her dress with new purpose. She would need to be smart about this, careful. She would need to transform herself completely, become someone worthy of her new position. And then, when she was ready, she would return to London society. And Lord Adrian Blackwood would learn exactly what it felt like to lose everything. The smile that crossed Isabella's face was not kind. For 6 months, she'd been broken, defeated, accepting her fate. But that Isabella was gone. In her place was Countess Isabella Hartley, and she had plans to make. The game was about to begin, and this time, she would be the one setting the rules. Part 2, The Transformation and Return. Becoming the Countess. Rosewood Manor took Isabella's breath away. She'd tried to prepare herself during the long carriage ride from London, had reminded herself repeatedly that this was her home now, her property. But nothing could have readied her for the reality of the sprawling estate with its perfectly manicured gardens, elegant Georgian architecture, and small army of servants lined up to greet their new mistress. "Welcome home, my lady," the butler intoned, bowing deeply. He was elderly, distinguished, and clearly struggling to hide his surprise at Isabella's appearance. She knew what he saw, a young woman in a plain traveling dress, worn shoes, carrying a single battered trunk. Not exactly the image of a wealthy countess. "Thank you." Isabella paused, realizing she didn't know his name. "Pemberton, my lady. I served Lady Catherine for 32 years. Mr. Pemberton. I appreciate your welcome, and I hope you'll be patient with me as I learn how to properly manage an estate of this size. I confess I have much to learn." Something shifted in Pemberton's expression, respect, perhaps, at her honest admission. Lady Catherine left instructions that we were to assist you in every way possible, my lady. She was quite particular about that. Over the following weeks, Isabella threw herself into learning everything about her new life. Pemberton proved invaluable, teaching her the endless protocols of running a great house. The housekeeper, Mrs. Davies, helped her understand the complex hierarchy of servants and the schedules that kept everything running smoothly. The estate manager walked her through the accounts, the tenant farms, the investments that generated her substantial income. But Isabella's real education came from an unlikely source. Among Lady Catherine's possessions, she found extensive journals documenting the old countess's thoughts on society, politics, and the art of wielding power as a woman in a man's world. Lady Catherine, it seemed, had been quite remarkable, intelligent, strategic, and not afraid to challenge conventions when necessary. A woman with money and title has more power than most people realize, Lady Catherine had written in one entry. But she must be smart about how she uses it. Society will forgive a wealthy woman almost anything if she's clever enough to make them think it was their idea all along. Isabella read those journals late into the night, absorbing every lesson, every observation, every bit of hard-won wisdom. She studied the names Lady Catherine mentioned, who had influence, who had secrets, who could be trusted, and who couldn't. And slowly, carefully, Isabella began her transformation. The making of a lady. Absolutely not, my lady. You must sit straighter. Imagine a string pulling you up from the crown of your head. Isabella adjusted her posture under Madame Rousseau's critical eye. The Frenchwoman was a legend among London's elite, a teacher of deportment, etiquette, and all the subtle arts that separated true ladies from those merely pretending. She was expensive, demanding, and exactly what Isabella needed. Better, Madame Rousseau acknowledged. Now, when entering a ballroom, you must glide, not walk. Like so. She demonstrated, moving across the floor with such grace she seemed to float. A countess does not hurry. A countess does not shuffle. A countess moves with purpose and confidence, as if the room exists for her benefit. For 3 months, Isabella worked with Madame Rousseau 6 days a week. She learned how to walk, sit, stand, gesture. She learned the language of fans, the proper way to wear a shawl, the exact angle to tilt her head to convey interest or dismissal. She learned which topics were appropriate for morning calls versus dinner parties, how to navigate the complex social hierarchies of the ton, and most importantly, how to command a room without seeming to try. You have natural intelligence, Madame Rousseau observed during one lesson. That will help you more than you know. Stupid women, no matter how beautiful or wealthy, are never truly respected. But a woman who is both elegant and clever? She can rule society. Isabella also transformed her appearance. She hired London's finest modiste, commissioning a wardrobe that would make even the most fashionable ladies envious. Gowns in rich jewel tones that made her pale skin glow and highlighted the auburn in her brown hair. Simple but perfect day dresses. Evening gowns that were sophisticated rather than showy, elegant rather than obvious. She learned to style her hair in the latest fashions, to use subtle cosmetics that enhanced rather than painted. She studied current fashion plates and learned which styles suited her figure, which colors complemented her complexion. But the changes weren't just external. Isabella hired tutors to improve her French and Italian, to teach her music and art appreciation, to discuss philosophy and current events. She read voraciously, newspapers, novels, political essays, anything that would help her understand the world she was entering. Every night, she reviewed what she'd learned, pushing herself harder. Good wasn't enough. She needed to be perfect. When she returned to London, no one could find any flaw, any weakness. She would be beyond reproach. And through it all, she thought of Adrian Blackwood. His cold gray eyes. His cruel words. The way he'd destroyed her life without a second thought. He would pay for that. But not yet. Not until she was ready. The plan takes shape. 6 months after inheriting her fortune, Isabella finally felt ready to begin the next phase of her plan. She hired a private investigator, discreetly, of course, to learn everything about Adrian Blackwood's current situation. What she discovered was fascinating. Adrian, it seemed, had been making poor decisions. He'd invested heavily in a shipping venture that failed when 3 ships were lost in a storm. He'd gambled and lost significant sums at several exclusive clubs. He'd loaned money to friends who couldn't repay him. Most damagingly, he'd bought property in an area that local developers had claimed would boom but which instead had remained worthless. The Earl of Thornfield was, in short, approaching financial ruin. He hadn't lost everything yet, but he was close. His estate was mortgaged, his debts mounting, his reputation as a shrewd businessman crumbling. It was almost too perfect. Isabella spent weeks working with her solicitors and financial advisors, carefully buying up Adrian's debts from various creditors. She used intermediaries, shell companies, fake names, anything to keep her involvement hidden. Slowly, methodically, she acquired control of nearly everything Adrian owed. The Thornfield estate itself was more complicated. It was entailed, meaning Adrian couldn't sell it even if he wanted to. But Isabella discovered that the entailment had a loophole. If Adrian failed to meet certain financial obligations, control of the estate could pass to his creditors temporarily, with Adrian effectively serving as estate manager until the debts were satisfied. It took 6 more months of careful maneuvering, but finally, Isabella had what she needed. She owned Adrian Blackwood's debts. She controlled his future. One word from her, and he would lose everything. Almost everything. She couldn't take his title, that was his by birth, untouchable. But she could take his pride, his arrogance, his certainty that people like her could never touch people like him. And she would do it in the most public way possible. The Grand Ball. The invitation was printed on the finest cardstock, embossed with gold, delivered by personal courier to every important household in London. Countess Isabella Hartley requests the pleasure of your company at a grand ball celebrating her formal entrance into London society. Isabella had spared no expense. Rosewood House, her London property, had been cleaned and decorated until it rivaled any palace. She'd hired the best musicians, the finest caterers, the most prestigious servants. Every detail was perfect, designed to announce that Countess Hartley was a force to be reckoned with. The Ton responded with enthusiasm. A new countess with considerable wealth and no obvious scandals attached to her name? Everyone wanted an invitation. Isabella's secretary reported that they'd received dozens of requests to attend from people who hadn't been on the original guest list, including one from Lord Adrian Blackwood, Earl of Thornfield. Isabella smiled when she saw his name. Of course he'd want to attend. A wealthy, unmarried countess? She represented everything Adrian valued: money, social position, useful connections. He would view her as a potential solution to his financial problems, either through marriage or strategic alliance. He had no idea she'd been planning this moment for a year. The night of the ball, Isabella stood in her dressing room while Martha, her new lady's maid, skilled and discreet, put the final touches on her appearance. The gown was a masterpiece. Deep sapphire silk that shimmered when she moved, cut to perfection to highlight her figure while remaining elegantly appropriate. Diamonds at her throat and ears, real ones, not paste. Her hair swept up in an elaborate style that had taken Martha 2 hours to perfect. Subtle cosmetics that made her skin glow and her eyes appear larger, more mysterious. Isabella barely recognized herself in the mirror. Gone was the timid governess in her borrowed dress. In her place stood a woman of power and sophistication, someone who could command any room she entered. "You look magnificent, my lady," Martha said softly. "Thank you, Martha. I believe I'm ready." She descended the grand staircase just as her guests began arriving. The entrance hall of Rosewood House gleamed with candlelight, the air filled with the scent of hothouse flowers and expensive perfume. Isabella stood at the top of the stairs, positioned perfectly for everyone to see her entrance. The conversations below quieted as people noticed her. She saw the moment recognition failed to spark in their eyes. They saw a beautiful, sophisticated countess, but they didn't see Isabella Munro. That girl was gone, transformed so completely that even people who might have known her before wouldn't make the connection. Perfect. Isabella descended slowly, gracefully, exactly as Madame Rousseau had taught her. She greeted her guests with practiced charm, saying exactly the right things, laughing at appropriate moments, making each person feel valued and important. This was her stage, her performance, and she would play it perfectly. And then, 2 hours into the ball, Adrian Blackwood arrived. The dance of revenge. Isabella saw him enter from across the ballroom. He was still handsome, she noted dispassionately, tall, broad-shouldered, with those sharp aristocratic features and cold gray eyes. But there were new lines around his mouth, and his expression held a tension that hadn't been there before. The weight of his financial troubles, perhaps. She watched him scan the crowd, clearly looking for her. When his gaze finally found her, she saw the interest spark immediately. He began moving toward her, cutting through the crowd with the entitled confidence of a man used to getting what he wanted. Isabella turned away, pretending not to notice him. Let him work for her attention. Let him feel what it was like to be dismissed. Countess Hartley. His voice was smooth, practiced. I don't believe we've had the pleasure of an introduction. Isabella turned slowly, her expression politely curious. My lord? Adrian Blackwood, Earl of Thornfield. He bowed, his eyes never leaving her face. I must tell you, Countess, this is the finest ball I've attended in years. You've set a new standard for London entertaining. How kind of you to say so, Lord Blackwood. Isabella's smile was pleasant but distant, the smile she might give any minor acquaintance. I hope you're enjoying the evening. More so by the moment. Adrian moved closer, lowering his voice to something more intimate. I confess I've been curious about you since I heard of your arrival in London. A young, beautiful countess appearing seemingly from nowhere? Quite mysterious. Hardly mysterious, my lord. I inherited from a distant relative and chose to claim what was mine. It's a common enough story. Perhaps. But there's nothing common about you, Countess Hartley. His eyes traveled over her appreciatively. Would you honor me with a dance? This was the moment Isabella had planned for. She pretended to consider, letting the silence stretch just long enough to be noticeable before offering her hand. I suppose one dance would be acceptable. He led her onto the floor as the orchestra struck up a waltz. Adrian was a skilled dancer, she'd expected that, and he held her with the exact amount of propriety required while still managing to convey interest. They moved together smoothly, and Isabella let herself enjoy the moment. Not because of his company, but because of what she was about to do. You dance beautifully, Countess, Adrian murmured. May I be forward and say that I'd very much like to know you better? Forward indeed, Lord Blackwood. We've only just met. Sometimes one simply knows. I felt at the moment I saw you, we could be very good for each other. You're new to London society and could benefit from guidance navigating its complexities. I have connections, experience, influence. Together, we could be quite formidable. Isabella nearly laughed. He wasn't even trying to hide his calculation. She was wealthy, he needed money. She was new, he had connections. It was a business proposition disguised as romantic interest. Just like everything else about Adrian Blackwood, cold, transactional, cruel beneath a polished surface. An interesting proposition, my lord, Isabella said carefully. Though I wonder, do you often approach ladies you've just met with such strategic alliances? Something flickered in his eyes. I prefer to be honest about practical matters. Surely you, as a woman of obvious intelligence, can appreciate that? Oh, I do appreciate honesty, Lord Blackwood. In fact, I have something honest I'd like to discuss with you. But perhaps not here, not during a dance. Would you join me in the library after this waltz? I have a business matter to discuss. Adrian's smile widened. He thought she was interested, Isabella realized. He thought this was her agreeing to his proposition. Men like him always assumed women would eventually bend to their will. He was about to learn otherwise. The waltz ended, and Isabella led Adrian through the ballroom, noting the curious glances that followed them. Good. Let people watch. Let them bear witness to what came next. The library was quieter, lined with books and lit by soft lamplight. Isabella closed the door behind them and turned to face Adrian, her expression shifting from pleasant to businesslike. Now then, Lord Blackwood. Let's discuss your situation honestly, since you claim to value honesty. Adrian's smile turned more intimate. He clearly thought they were about to negotiate terms of courtship, possibly something more physical. I'm delighted to hear you're interested in. I'm interested in discussing the £47,000 you owe to various creditors throughout London, Isabella interrupted calmly. And the fact that I now own virtually all of your debt.